Hello, this is Teresa from Whimsical Card Studio. I'm going to be sharing how I created this cute little Easter card using Crackerbox and Suzy stamps. What I did on the front is created a little shaker window, and on the inside it pops up to display this little Easter scene. So let's get started. First, I'm going to need a piece of cardstock, and this is cut to 5.5 by 8.5. And I put a piece of masking tape in the center of the card so that I could mask off the bottom while I create the cloud scene up at top using a stencil and this Distress Oxide ink. And once I finish that part, I'll be flipping it over to the other side, masking the top part of it, and using Lucky Clover Distress Oxide ink to cover the entire bottom half of the panel. And now I'm going to score the card at 4.25 inches, and that will make this a standard A2 size card when it's folded. Now I did color another A2 panel, card panel front, and in the same ink because I'm going to use that to make the grassy hills. Next, I'm creating the two hinges in order to attach the grass hillside borders to the inside of the card. So I'm making two of these hinges and they're different sizes. So I've put the sizes on the top of the screen and where I'm scoring them so that you can write that information down or stop and rewatch that part if necessary. So now that I have all these pieces, I need to adhere the grass to each one of the little hinges here. I've already folded in the little 1/4 inch flaps and put some adhesive on there. I've used score tape, some very thin score tape, so that I can just pull off the liner when I'm ready to adhere this hinge to my card. And again, just gluing the hillside border to the other smaller hinge. And now that that's done, I can work on putting this onto the card. So with the card base in front of me, I'm going to temporarily put some tape down to hold it in place while I'm working on adhering these hills. So I'm basically reinforcing those little 1/4 inch flaps on each edge to make sure that they're lined up the way they need to be. I'm going to line this up to where it is 1.25 inches from the center, and then I press down the score tape. Then I fold this down, remove the score tape, and press the front of the panel down on it, and that creates the first hill. I'll repeat the process again for the second one. First, I will remove the tape, and since the width of this part is 3/4 inch, I moved it down 3/4 inch from the previous panel. I'm removing the tape, hold it in place, and push down the card to grab it with the tape. And so when I show you how it looks from the top and side view, you kind of get an idea of how this works. And next I'm bringing in all my colored images, and I'm going to work on placing them onto the card. With the chick, at first I started by adhering it onto some acetate, and I had scored it so that I could place it pretty much right at the top edge of that hill in the back. Unfortunately, it turned out later I had to adjust that and move it down because it was a little too high and was peeking out of the front of the card, but I went back and fixed that later off camera. So I'm using some temporary adhesive and just kind of playing with the placement of the Copic color eggs. And once I'm satisfied with the placement, I come back in with permanent ink and I add that to each one of the die cuts and glue them in place. And now I need to create a front for my card. So to keep in line with the whole design I've used so far, I'm using a piece of that same 2-inch masking tape, and I've basically just took my scissors and cut a simple hilly kind of border there. And I'm using that to mask off the bottom. Then I'm bringing back in the cloud stencil and the Distress Oxide ink in blue, in order to create some fluffy clouds at the top of my scene. And I was planning initially on making an entire panel and putting this on the front, but as you've already seen from the beginning of the video, I didn't use the whole panel. I ended up die cutting this from an oval later on and created a frame, and then from that ended up adding the shaker element on top of that. So I created this entire panel, and had I known I was going to just die cut it out of an oval, I might have only done half of this instead of the whole thing. But anyway, sometimes things change as you move along with the design of the card. And so now I'm using the piece that I had cut out of the tape earlier, and I'm lining that up roughly with the edge of the other piece that's already down, removing the bottom piece of the masking tape, and I'm just going to use it to temporarily hold the top in place while I go back over the bottom with Distress Oxide ink in green. And I will have the colors and products listed below in the description box in the video if you're interested in any of the things that I'm using today. So once I have this done, I'll remove the masking paper and I'll have my scene ready, which, like I said earlier, I end up turning into an oval shape. So up at the top left of the screen, you see the two nesting dies that I'm using, and I've already die cut out of that scene using the larger one and created a little frame out of some pink polka dotted paper. And then I die cut a piece of acetate using the largest die so that I could create my shaker window for the front. And then I line up the little hillside sky scene and put my stamp in the MISTI, stamped it, and thought it looked perfectly straight, but when I actually got it out later, I realized it was a little crooked, so I decided I wasn't going to do it again. Now I'm adding some some glue to the pink polka dotted oval shape, and then adding the acetate on top of that. I'll put a block on it and set it aside for a little time to dry. And as you can see, in the meantime, I've die cut 3 oval shapes out of white cardstock. I'm stacking them on top of each other, gluing them all together, and then the final piece is gluing on the pink oval that has the acetate over on the back of it already. So this will create basically my window for the shaker, and I'm only using some very tiny little cupcake sprinkles from Little Lucy's Things. And I will remove some of those, put them in the center of the little scene there. Then I will add adhesive to the back of the oval frame. And once that's done, I'll attach that to create my shaker window. And now I'm working on the front panel. As you can see, I've already layered a piece of white cardstock that I embossed in an embossing folder on the front and matted it with a black frame. And I'm going to be adding a piece of ribbon to it, so I'm adding some score tape to the back, and because I didn't place it right the first time, I used a piece of masking paper on the front so that I could get that more centered when I wrap it around the front of the card, as you can see. So I've used blue polka dotted paper on top of another strip of black paper to create a mat around that part, and now I'm using some reverse tweezers to hold the ribbon in place while I tie it into the bow. And now we're pretty much getting close to having this whole thing together. So I tie the bow, I trim off the ends of each one of those lengths of ribbon, and then the final touch is adding the little shaker window. So I just add some liquid glue onto the back of it, and this was pretty much the point where I realized my sentiment was not as straight as I thought it was. So I settled for just making sure that when I adhered the shaker window to the front, I decided to make sure that the shape itself was lined up correctly on the card. I kept playing with, was I going to make the sentiment straight or the shape straight, and ended up going for the shape. but I think you get the idea of what to do, how to avoid my mistake. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope you will subscribe if you haven't already and leave me a comment if you liked what you saw today. Thank you and see you next time.